Chapter 25. Cam. The late afternoon cast long shadows across the parking lot in front of the warehouse as the sun sank to the west. Its gradual departure turned the browns and greens of the surrounding hills darker shades of their daytime colors. Birds burst from a row of green hedges as four men crept forward from around the corner of a nearby building. The Green Berets and Bayette brothers were back. They moved quickly once they were clear of cover, heading straight to the front doors of the warehouse. Alex jumped to his feet when he caught sight of them approaching and hurried to unlock the doors. Mike and Tim were now dressed in jeans and flannel shirts. The flannels were a mixture of green and yellow, the closest thing the two soldiers could find that might assist with blending into the countryside. There really was no urban camouflage that worked like the other options offered for hunting or fighting in the great outdoors. With the vast array of different colored buildings in any given city, a soldier was better off wearing something that was comfortable rather than trying to blend in. Cam heard the commotion at the front of the store, and although he'd been half dozing in a folding chair, he got to his feet and crept to the front of the warehouse, rifle held at the ready. The longer they were here doing nothing, the more uncomfortable he felt about the safety of his wife and children. He wanted to be out there, seeing what there was to see, and then reacting to whatever threat lurked outside. First, he needed to get Jen and the kids to his parents, and that issue was beginning to feel like a burr in the seat of his britches. At the front of the warehouse, Mike dumped out a plastic bag full of ski masks he'd gotten from an REI store. Also in the bag were several pairs of thin black gloves. The gloves weren't tactical handwear, but they were thin and would allow a man or woman to manipulate a rifle or pistol while protecting themselves from leaving fingerprints behind. As everyone approached from different areas of the warehouse, Mike tossed the head and handwear to each person. Cam caught a ski mask and pair of gloves, then pulled the mask on and shouldered his rifle, testing his cheek weld and ability to align the sights with the mask wrapped around his head. He pulled the mask up, let the rifle hang from the sling, and removed the thin plastic piece that joined the two gloves. Sliding the gloves on, Cam pulled the mask down and worked through several shooting positions, then a couple mock reloads and weapons malfunction sequences. The gloves were a little slippery on the rifle's surface, but he figured once the material got a little dirt and grime on them, they'd grip the weapon's smooth surfaces better. He made a note to find a hardware store and grab a pair of mechanic's gloves like he'd worn when he'd been slaying terrorists in his former life. Seeing Cam working on the gloves, Mike caught his attention with a smile. Not the best option, but better than nothing for now. Yeah, I'm going to a hardware store as soon as I can and grab a set of mechanic's gloves. If I'm not with you, grab 2 pairs. Double XL, Mike clucked as he withdrew a couple cans of green and brown spray paint from a second bag. All the rifles should look the same. Make it as hard as we can on these guys to single any one of us out. Cam gestured to Mike's suppressor. You gonna lose the can? Mike grimaced, shaking his head as he stared down at the suppressor. That I won't do. I have 5 cans at home in Tennessee. Sure do wish I had them right about now. Mike just grunted as he wrinkled his nose, drawing in a deep breath. I want to use the truck now, Cam said, shifting gears. Jim can use it to drive my wife and kids to Sonoma after I do a recon of the exit route. We should go now while we've got some light. Let me talk to Jen and I'll grab my gear, Cam replied, swiveling to leave. Jen knew better than to argue with her husband at certain times, just like he knew better than to argue with her on other matters. Now was one of those times. She didn't want to leave, but knew better than to put up a stink. Cam tried going easy and not scaring her, while still conveying to her how dangerous things were about to get. There were armored vehicles in the area from a hostile country, and there were no U.S. counters to their sudden appearance. He explained their situation to be akin to the top of a roller coaster track. They'd been chugging up the track, dragged by whatever mechanism propelled the coaster to its launch point, and now they were at the point of no return as they'd reached the precipice of their climb. It could be hours, or it could be minutes before the coaster went screaming into its first plunge, and he didn't want his family aboard when that happened. Silently, Jen packed the few things she'd be taking to Chuck and Connie's place in Sonoma. As she packed, she listened to her husband. He knew she focused on the preparations in order not to break down or cry out of frustration as he told her nothing but negative things tethered to their future. When Jen and the kids were ready, she hugged her husband tightly and whispered in his ear so the children couldn't hear. "Please don't get yourself hurt out there." Her voice wavered slightly, and her body shook as her fear bordered on terror at the thought of navigating the uncertainty of a war-torn country without her life partner. "I'm not going anywhere, and I'll be out to Sonoma very soon," he lied. He actually fostered no idea what the future held for him. He'd been to war, and was well aware that a fight, estimated to take a few months, could easily span decades. The U.S. foreign policy on wars had proven that 10 times over. Mike left Tim at the warehouse where he could talk to him via their radios. He'd let him know when Jim and the Griffins were safe to set out into the evening for Sonoma. Cam rode his bicycle behind the Green Beret as the two men made their way towards the Washington Street overpass that spanned Highway 101. They planned to assess the highway and overpass from the top of a nearby building, but would be forced to sneak into the area and choose the building that best suited their needs once they were on site. Neither man loved the plan, but lacking aerial footage, a drone on station, or pretty much any intel on their objective, they were forced to adapt and overcome. They intended to ditch the bicycles once they drew closer to their hide spot. Without bikes, the walk would have taken 4 times as long, and Cam was thankful for the 2-wheeled vehicles. They had discussed driving the golf cart, but felt it would garner far too much unwanted attention. They'd broken both of their rifles down and stashed them in backpacks slung on their backs. The ski masks and gloves were in pockets, ready for use once they went operational. Neither wanted to ride around strapped with rifles and sporting ski masks when they could ride through town looking mostly like normal people out scavenging for food or information. Drawing nearer the overpass, both men dismounted and began to search for a spot to hide the bicycles. They found it in a place where thick vines of ivy grew up a tall chain-link fence surrounding what appeared to be a public pool. After he scrubbed the handlebar grips with his shirt to erase his prints, Cam grabbed the ivy and pulled it away from the fence. Mike slipped the 2 bicycles under the blanket of vegetation and sandwiched them between the fence and the ivy. Moving on feet, the two approached the backside of a shopping center where several large businesses sat in the middle of an expansive parking lot. A large department store sat close to the overpass, but getting to it would place them in the openness of the flat parking lot. With only a paltry amount of cover and concealment from the parked cars, this wouldn't do. Cam pointed at a bank, farther from the overpass, but still closer to himself and Mike at the western edge of the parking lot. A sharp nod of agreement from Mike, and the 2 men were off, heading in the bank's direction. They pushed forward, keeping the building between themselves and the overpass until they reached the back of the bank building. The roof was at least 12 to 15 feet in height, nothing either man could simply jump, grab the edge, and climb up to. The flat openness of the area had Cam more than a little worried as they scanned the outside of the building for a plausible ingress to the rooftop. They could find nothing on the outside of the building that offered admittance to the rooftop. Lawyers had long ago caused many building owners to demand access to their rooftops be placed inside the structure for liability purposes. Now that little change metastasized into a different type of liability. Looking up at the building, Mike removed his pack. "We aren't climbing this thing." Cam didn't respond as he scanned the surrounding area. The sun was officially down, with little to no light left from the day. The fully elongated shadows made threat detection difficult. Every shaded area seemed to shift and move as though they were living, breathing things. Mike opened his pack and withdrew a black L-shaped tool made of some sort of sheet metal. "Cover me while I open one of these side doors," he instructed, closing his pack and moving stealthily along the side of the bank building. Cam backpedaled, watching their rear as Mike made his way to a side access door marked "No Entry." Mike slipped the thin L-shaped tool through the crack between the wall and the door above the metal guard shielding the door's latch from nefarious persons such as the Green Beret. The tool slid in behind the guard on the inside of the door, and Mike gave a gentle tug, pulling the tool's edge back toward himself and into the latch, thus disengaging the mechanism. Mike slid the tool into his flannel, where it hung awkwardly as he raised his rifle and entered the bank's dark interior. Mike wasn't wearing his nods, which were in his pack and not the easiest things to get on without his helmet. Cam backed through the door, pulling it shut behind him and plunging them into utter darkness. Neither man moved or spoke for a full minute as their eyes adjusted and their ears strained for any sign they weren't alone in the bank. He doubted they'd run into anyone inside the building, but one could never know for sure until it was properly cleared. Quicker than he would have thought possible, his eyes acclimated and shapes took form around the interior of the building. Another minute, and Mike leaned into Cam's ear. "You ready?" He responded with a tap on Mike's shoulder, telling him to lead the way and he'd follow. Together, the men moved silently through the bank's rather small interior. The lobby was easily cleared, as was the teller area. Lastly, they explored the offices of the bank's executives. The examination of the building's interior revealed nothing that posed a threat. In fact, the bank appeared to have been closed and locked after the event and had miraculously escaped any looters. Inside a closet in a back hallway, Mike located a metal ladder affixed to the closet's interior wall, which led up to a closed hatch. The hatch wasn't locked, and within a few seconds, both men were crawling across the roof, staying low, since even in the darkening night, walking upright would have silhouetted them to any of the KPA soldiers outfitted with nods. The roof was designed with a low wall around the edge of the building's perimeter. Small openings dotted the base of the wall where any rainwater collected could be channeled off the building's flat rooftop. Cam tried to lie prone and use the drainage openings as a visual port, but the openings were so low he couldn't get low enough to see anything without laying on his side, and even then, his field of view was lousy. Mike moved to the corner of the roof and pulled out his binoculars. Raising the optics to the top of the wall, he examined the overpass and the area around it. After a minute, he lowered himself back down and motioned for Cam to take a look. Cam slithered up to the corner, craning his neck until his eyes were aligned with the optic's eyepiece lenses. He moved his hand slowly to the focusing ring and turned it until what he saw in the glass was as clear as he could get it. Slowly, he shifted the optics left, studying the far side of the overpass, then pulled his gaze right and examined the nearest side of the overpass. Nothing moved, and he saw no sign of a tank or other large vehicle of war. He pushed his search further out, looking past the overpass where the road led out into what appeared to be a neighborhood until the blackness of night blotted out his ability to see any deeper to the east. He carefully swiveled the optics around, tracking Washington Street back the way he and Mike had come, looking for any sign of the Koreans, their vehicles, or any other people. He searched for anything that might pose a danger to his family once they were called on to traverse this dangerous stretch of roadway. He found nothing but quiet, deserted streets. "I don't see a thing moving out there," Cam whispered. "Me neither, but let's wait a while before we call Tim. Make doubly sure." Cam pushed his face back into the optics and repeated his searches of all 4 compass points, and again saw nothing. 20 minutes later, Mike came off the optics and pulled out his radio. In a hushed voice, he called Tim on their net. "Bandit 1 actual, Bandit 2 over." Tim's voice came right back. "Sit rep?" he queried, asking Mike for a situational report. "All quiet, nothing moving." "Send 'em?" Tim asked. Mike glanced over to where Cam sat, tensely gripping his rifle. "Send 'em,"